Mr. Darcy leaves Mr. Collins' parsonage, adjusting his gloves and carrying his hat as he meditates on Elizabeth's words. Elizabeth cries in frustration as she paces in the parlour. Mr. Darcy enters Rosings and stops in the doorway, quite downcast, as he mulls over Elizabeth's last words. But Colonel Fitzwilliam walks into the room.
Darcy, we are quite despaired of you.
No, you'll forgive me. You'll forgive me.
Darcy takes off upstairs.
Darcy, you unwell?
I'm very well, thank you, but I have a pressing matter of business. You will forgive me. Make my apologies to Lady Catherine Fitzwilliam.
Darcy reaches his room and closes the door firmly behind him and turns around. He walks to the desk, sits down, opens a drawer and pulls out some paper and a pen, dipping it in ink.
To Miss Elizabeth Bennet. Be not alarmed, madam, on receiving this letter that it contain any repetition of those sentiments or renewal of those offers which were this evening so disgusting to you. But I must be allowed to defend myself against the charges laid at my door, in particular those relating to Mr. Wickham, which, if true, would indeed be grievous, but are wholly without foundation, and which I can only refute by laying before you his connection with my family. Mr. Wickham is the son of a very respectable man who had the management of our family estates. My own father was fond of him, held him in high esteem. We played together as boys. After his father's early death, my father supported him at school and afterwards at Cambridge, and hoped he would make the church his profession. By then, George Wickham's habits were as dissolute as his manners were engaging. My own excellent father died 5 years ago, and his attachment to Mr. Wickham was to the last so steady that he desired that a valuable family living might be his as soon as it was vacant. Mr. Wickham declined any interest in the church as a career, but requested and was granted the sum of £3,000 instead of the living. He expressed an intention of studying the law. I wished rather than believed him to be sincere. All connection between us seemed now dissolved. Being now free from all restraint, his life was one of idleness and dissipation. How he lived, I know not. But last summer our paths crossed again under the most painful circumstances, which I myself would wish to forget. My sister Georgiana, who was more than 10 years my junior, was left to the guardianship of Colonel Fitzwilliam and myself. About a year ago, she was taken from school to Ramsgate and placed in the care of a Mrs. Young, in whose character we were most unhappily deceived. And thither also went Mr. Wickham, undoubtedly by design. She was persuaded to believe herself in love and to consent to an elopement. She was then but 15 years old, A day or two before the intended elopement, I joined them unexpectedly. Unable to support the idea of grieving a brother whom she looked up to almost as a father, she acknowledged the whole plan to me at once. You may imagine what I felt and how I acted. Mr. Wickham left the place immediately. He relinquished his object, which was, of course, my sister's fortune of £30,000. A secondary motive must have been to revenge himself on me. Had he succeeded, his revenge would have been complete indeed. This, madam, is a faithful narrative of all my dealings with Mr. Wickham.
Darcy drops his pen and leans back with a sigh. He rests his head back on the chair, very distressed, before leaning forward with determination, dipping his pen in ink. At the parsonage, Mr. and Mrs. Collins and Maria sit down to breakfast. Elizabeth walks in wearing a jacket and holding a hat.
Oh, you do look pale, Lizzie. Why don't you have some breakfast? I'm sure it will do you good.
Oh, no, I'm well, Charlotte. I think I've stayed indoors too long. Fresh air and exercise is all I need. The woods around Rosings are so beautiful at this time of year.
Mr. Collins wants to speak, but can't with his mouth full of food. Elizabeth exits. Elizabeth walks on a hill, swinging her hat. She turns all the way around to see if anyone is around before taking off at a run. She slows back down to a walking pace, but stops and turns around when she sees Mr. Darcy. Her last step cracks a twig, and Darcy turns around and approaches her.
Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy.
I've been walking this grove some time in hope of meeting you. Will you do me the honour of reading this letter?
Elizabeth takes it, and Darcy swiftly bows and leaves. Elizabeth watches him go, and then finds a place to sit and read his letter.
This, madam, is a faithful narrative of all my dealings with Mr. Wickham, and for its truth I can appeal to the testimony of Colonel Fitzwilliam, who knows every particular of these transactions. I know not under what form or falsehood Mr. Wickham imposed himself on you, but I hope you will acquit me of cruelty towards him. The charge levelled at me is that, regardless of the sentiments of either party, I detach Mr. Bingley from your sister. I have no wish to deny this, nor can I blame myself for any of my actions in this matter.
Furious, Elizabeth folds the letter, picks up her hat, and continues walking.
I had not long been in Hertfordshire before I saw that Bingley admired your sister, but it was not until the dance at Netherfield that I suspected a serious attachment. His partiality was clear, but though she received his attentions with pleasure, I did not detect any symptoms of peculiar regard. The serenity of her countenance convinced me that her heart was not likely to be easily touched.
Insufferable presumption!
I did not believe her to be indifferent because I wished it. I believed it on impartial conviction.
Oh, very impartial.
Elizabeth reaches the parsonage. Maria runs out to her excitedly.
You've missed the two gentlemen. They came to take their leave.
Mr. Darcy came here.
Yes, but he went away again, and Colonel waited for you for over half an hour, and now they are both gone out of the country.
I dare say we shall be able to bear the deprivation.
Elizabeth enters the house, followed by Maria. She hurries up the stairs, leaving a confused Maria behind her. Elizabeth goes to her guest room, closes the door firmly, and sits in a chair to read.
As to my objections to the marriage, the situation of your family, though objectionable, was nothing in comparison with the total want of propriety so frequently betrayed by your mother, your younger sisters, and even on occasion your father.
Elizabeth stops reading and reflects for a moment.
My friend left Netherfield for London the day following the ball. There I engaged in the office of pointing out to him the certain evils of his choice of your sister as a prospective bride. It was not difficult to convince him of your sister's indifference to him. I cannot blame myself for having done thus much.
You're destroying all her hope of happiness. Yes, I am sure you do not blame yourself. Hateful man!
There is but one part of my conduct in the affair on which I do not reflect with satisfaction.
Oh, really? Astonish me.
That is that I concealed from him your sister's being in town. Perhaps this concealment was beneath me. It is done, however, and it was done for the best. On this subject, I have nothing more to say and no other apology to offer.
Lizzie!
Charlotte, my dear, we will be late.
Lizzie!
Elizabeth hesitates and then gets up. The party walks down the path towards the house at Rosings. Lady Catherine, once again, holds court.
They were such fine young men, and so particularly attached to me. They were excessively sorry to go, but so they always are. The dear Colonel rallied his spirits tolerably, but Darcy seemed to feel it most acutely. His attachment to Rosings certainly increases.
Elizabeth keeps her eyes downcast, and Lady Catherine notices.
You are very dull this evening, Miss Elizabeth Bennet. You have scarce spoke 2 words together. Are you so out of spirits?
No, indeed, madam.
But of course you are, to be going away yourself.
And who indeed would not be sad to be deprived of Rosings, and indeed of the gracious condescension.
You will write to your mother and tell her you wish to stay a little longer. She could certainly spare you for another fortnight.
But my father cannot. He wrote last week to hurry my return. Your ladyship is very kind, but I believe we must leave as planned on Friday.
Oh, your father may spare you if your mother can. Daughters are never of much consequence to a father, and if you will stay another month complete, it will be in my power to take you as far as London myself in the barouche box, for I cannot bear the idea of 2 young women travelling post by themselves. It's highly improper. I am excessively attentive to all those things.
My uncle is to send a servant for us when we change to the post.
Oh, your uncle. He keeps a manservant, does he? I'm very glad you have somebody who thinks of these things. Where will you change horse?
Oh, at Bromley.
Oh, Bromley, of course. Mention my name at the bell and they will attend you.
Your ladyship is very kind.
Indeed, we are all infinitely indebted to your ladyship's kindly bestowed solicitude.
Yes, but this is all extremely vexing. I am quite put out.
Elizabeth enters in her travel clothes, while Maria repacks her clothes.
Maria, what are you doing? I thought the trunks went outside before breakfast.
Lady Catherine was so severe last evening about the only right way to pack gowns that I couldn't sleep, and I am determined to start afresh.
Maria, this is your trunk. These are your gowns. You may arrange them in any way you wish. Lady Catherine will never know.
Later, Charlotte directs the servants as they arrange the luggage on the carriage, as the others say their farewell.
Well, my dear sister, you will have much to tell your father and mother.
And indeed, scarcely a day has passed without some new kindness.
From Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Well, cousin, you have seen for yourself now the happiness of our situation. Our intimacy at Rosings is a blessing of which few could boast.
Indeed, they could not.
Indeed. And now you've witnessed our felicity, perhaps you may think that your friend has made a very fortunate alliance, perhaps more so than... But on this point it will be as well to be silent.
You are very good.
Only let me assure you that I can, from my heart, most cordially wish you equal felicity in marriage. My dear Charlotte and I have but one mind and one way of thinking. We seem to have been designed for each other.
Charlotte looks over, and Mr. Collins gives her a ridiculous smile and a rather silly wave. Elizabeth and Maria ride in the carriage.
Oh, Lizzie, it seems but a day since we came to Rosings, and yet how many things have happened.
A great many, indeed.
We have dined 9 times at Rosings. Oh, how much I shall have to tell.
How much I shall have to conceal.
Elizabeth leans forward to look out of the window, but pictures Darcy in her mind.
You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you.
Elizabeth turns sharply away from the window. The carriage travels down the road. The carriage enters a village and stops in front of an inn. Lydia and Kitty appear in a window above them. Lydia opens the window and waves.
Lizzie! Lizzie!
Elizabeth looks up as she steps out of the carriage. She smiles and waves. The girls climb the stairs and enter a small, sparsely decorated dining room.
Lord, to see your faces when you looked up at the window. I'll wager you didn't expect we'd come to meet you, did you?
No, we did not.
Oh, there, is this not nice? Cold ham and pork and salads and every good thing. And we mean to treat you all. Oh, but you must lend us the money. We spent all ours, look.
Lydia picks up an ugly bonnet.
I don't think it's very pretty, but I thought I might as well buy it as not.
It's vile, isn't it, Lizzie?
Very ugly. What possessed you to buy it, Lydia?
Well, there were 2 or 3 much uglier in the shop. I shall pull it to pieces as soon as we get home and see if I can make it up any better. Well, it doesn't signify what anyone wears, for the regiment will leave Meryton and will be at Brighton for the whole summer. Our hearts are broken.
We want Papa to take us all to Brighton for the summer, but he said that he will not.
I'm glad to hear it.
Shouldn't you like to go to Brighton, Lizzie?
Indeed, I should not.
Oh, she would. She would love it above all things when she hears the news about a certain person we all know. Shall we tell her, Kitty?
Yes, and watch to see if she blushes.
Wickham is not to marry Mary King after all. He's been taken away by her uncle to Liverpool and Wickham is safe.
Perhaps we should say Mary King is safe.
But was there a very strong attraction between them, do you think?
Not on his side, I'm sure. I shouldn't think he cared 3 straws about her. Who could about such a nasty little freckled thing? Oh, don't look at me like that, Lizzie. I know you think as ill of her as I do. Pass the celery, Kitty. Well, aren't you glad we came to meet you? We shall be all such a merry party on the journey home.
Elizabeth is finally home. Jane and Elizabeth are in their nightgowns once again, preparing for bed.
Mr. Darcy proposed. I can scarce believe it. Not that anyone admiring you should be astonishing, but he always seemed so cold, so severe, apparently, and yet he was in love with you all the time. Oh, poor Mr. Darcy.
Well, I confess I cannot feel so much compassion for him. He has other feelings, which will soon drive away any regard he felt for me. You do not blame me for refusing him?
Blame you? Oh, no.
But you blame me for speaking so warmly of Wickham.
No. How could you have known about his vicious character, if indeed he was so very bad? But I cannot believe Mr. Darcy would fabricate such a dreadful slander involving his own sister, too. No, it must be true. Perhaps there has been some terrible mistake.
No, Jane, that won't do. You'll never be able to make them both good. There is just enough merit between the 2 of them to make one good sort of man. And for my part, I am inclined to believe it's all Mr. Darcy's.
Poor Mr. Darcy. Poor Mr. Wickham. There is such an expression of goodness in his countenance.
Yes, I'm afraid one has all the goodness and the other all the appearance of it.
But Lizzie, I'm sure when you first read that letter, you could not have made so light of it as you do now.
Indeed, I could not. I was very uncomfortable till that moment. I never knew myself. And I had no Jane to comfort me. Oh, how I wanted you.
Elizabeth embraces Jane.
There is one point on which I want your advice. Should our general acquaintances be informed of Wickham's true character?
Surely there can be no occasion to expose him so cruelly. What is your own opinion?
That it ought not to be attempted. Mr. Darcy has not authorised me to make it public, especially regards his sister. And for the rest, who would believe it? The general prejudice against Mr. Darcy is so violent, and Wickham will soon be gone. I believe we should say nothing about it at present.
Yes, I agree. Perhaps he is sorry now for what he has done, and is anxious to re-establish his character in the world. We must not make him desperate.
Oh, Jane, I wish I could think so well of people as you do.
The following day, the Bennets sit down to breakfast.
Oh, won't you speak to Papa, Lizzie, about our going to Brighton? You know he listens to your advice.
You flatter me, Lydia, but in any case, I shouldn't attempt to persuade him. I think it's a very good thing that the regiment should be removed from Meryton, and that we should be removed from the regiment.
Oh, Lizzie, how can you say such a thing?
Very easily, ma'am. If one poor company of militia can cause such havoc in our family, what would a whole camp full of soldiers do?
A whole camp full of soldiers.
Well, I remember when I was a girl, I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Miller's regiment went away. Oh, I thought it should have broke my heart.
Well, I'm sure I shall break mine.
Di.
Oh, there, my dears. But your father is determined to be cruel.
I confess I am. I'm sorry to be breaking so many hearts, but I have not the smallest intention of yielding.
I shall not break my heart, Papa. The pleasures of Brighton would have no charms for me. I should infinitely prefer a book.
Oh,
Mrs. Forster says she plans to go sea bathing.
oh, I'm sure I should love to go sea bathing.
A little sea bathing would set me up forever.
And yet I am unmoved. Well, I'm glad you've come back, Lizzie. And I'm glad you've come back, Jane.
Mr. Bennet leaves. Jane gives Elizabeth an amused look. Lydia whines and stomps her foot.
I want to go to Brighton.
Later that day, Elizabeth approaches Jane, who is clipping flowers for a bouquet and putting them in a basket on her arm. Elizabeth also has a basket full of flowers. She watches Jane.
You're not happy, Jane. Pains me to see it.
It is just that I did. I'm afraid I still do prefer Mr. Bingley to any other man I've ever met. And Lizzie, I did believe he... Well, I was mistaken. That is all. I'm resolved to think of him no more. There, enough. I shall be myself again, as if I'd never set eyes on him. Truly, Lizzie, I promise, I shall be well. I shall be myself again. I shall be perfectly content.
Jane turns and walks back to the house. Mrs. Bennet approaches Elizabeth, a basket and scissors in her hand.
Lizzie, what do you think of this sad business of Jane's? I cannot find out that she saw nothing of Mr. Bingley in London. Well, he's a very undeserving young man. Oh, and I suppose there's the least chance of her getting him now. If he should come back to Netherfield, though.
I think there's little chance of that, Mamma.
Well, just as he chooses. No one wants him to come. I shall always say he used my daughter extremely ill, and if I was her, I would have not put up with it. Well, my comfort is that she will die of a broken heart, and then he'll be sorry for what he's done. So, do the Collinses live quite comfortably, do they? Well, I only hope it will last. And I suppose they talk about having this house too when your father's dead. They look on it as quite their own, I dare say.
They could hardly discuss such a subject in front of me, Mamma.
Well, I make no doubt that they talk about it constantly when they're alone. Well, if they can be easy with an estate that is not lawfully their own, so much the better. I should be ashamed of having one that was only entailed upon me.
Mamma!
Lydia and Kitty run out of the house towards them.
Mamma, Lizzie, guess what? You never will, so I'll tell you. Mrs. Forster has invited me as her particular friend to go with her to Brighton. Colonel Forster is to take a house for us.
Oh, Lydia, I'm so happy for you. Oh, what an honour to be singled out.
Is it not unfair, Lizzie? Mrs. Forster should have asked me as well as Lydia. I may not be her particular friend, but I've just as much right to be asked as she has.
Ha 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 ha.
And more too, for I'm 2 years older.
Kitty turns and leaves.
Well, I shall buy her a present, I dare say. There's no call for her to be in a myth because Mrs. Forster likes me above anyone.
Lydia, before you crow too loud over your sister, remember, Papa has not given you permission to go, nor is he like to.
But Papa won't stop me going. Not when I've been specially invited by the Colonel of the regiment to be his wife's particular companion. Oh, Mamma, I shall have to be bought new clothes, for I've nothing fit to wear, and there'll be balls and parties every night.
Well, of course you shall have new things. We wouldn't see you disgraced in front of all them officers.
All the officers!
Later, Elizabeth paces in front of her father in his library.
Look, I understand your concern, my dear, but consider, Lydia will never be easy until she's exposed herself in some public place. And here is an opportunity for her to do so at very little expense or inconvenience to her family.
If you were aware, Father, of the very great disadvantage to us all, which must arise from Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, which has already arisen from it, I'm sure you would judge differently.
Already arisen? Well, does she frighten away some of your lovers? No, don't be cast down, Lizzie. Such squeamish youths are not worth your regret. Oh, come, Lizzie.
Indeed, you are mistaken. I have no injuries to resent. I speak of general, not particular evils. Our position as a family, our very respectability is called into question by Lydia's wild behaviour. Excuse me, I must speak plainly. If you do not take the trouble to check her, she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment. Her character will be fixed as the most determined flirt that ever made herself and her family ridiculous. You know that Kitty follows wherever Lydia leads. Don't you see that they will be censured and despised wherever they are known, and that they will involve their sisters in their own disgrace?
Lizzie, come here. Don't make yourself uneasy, my love. Wherever you and Jane are known, you must be respected and valued. You will not appear to any less advantage for having a couple, or I may say 3 very silly sisters. We shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton. Colonel Forster is a sensible man, and luckily she's too poor to be an object of prey to a fortune hunter.
Mr. Bennet stands. Elizabeth is about to speak, but he holds up his hand.
Now leave it, now, Lizzie. I believe all will turn out well.
Officers visit with the Bennets. Colonel Forster, Mr. Bennet, and Mr. Wickham stand around Mrs. Bennet, who is sitting holding court.
We are so desolated, Colonel, that the regiment is to leave Meryton. But words cannot express what we feel about your kindness to our dear Lydia.
Well, ma'am, it appears that Mrs. Forster cannot do without her. Look at the pair of them, as thick as thieves. Well, Lord knows what they find to talk about, but anything to keep the ladies happy. What do you say, Wickham?
I say amen to that, sir.
Wickham bows to them and crosses the room to Elizabeth.
There's one lady I shall be very loath to part from.
Well, we must bear it as best we can. You are for Brighton. I shall be touring the lakes with my aunt and uncle. I dare say we shall find ample sources of consolation and delight in our different ways.
Perhaps. How did you find Rosings?
Very interesting. Colonel Fitzwilliam was there with Mr. Darcy. Are you at all acquainted with the Colonel?
I, to some respects, yes, in former years. Very gentlemanly man. How did you like him?
I liked him very much indeed.
His manners are very different from his cousins.
Yes, but I think Mr. Darcy improves on closer acquaintance.
Indeed? In what respect? Has he acquired a touch of civility in his address? Or I dare not hope he has improved in essentials.
No, in essentials. I believe he is very much as he ever was.
Ah.
I don't mean to imply that either his mind or his manners have changed for the better. Rather, my knowing him better improved my opinion of him.
I see.
Wickham! Wickham, come here.
At your service, ma'am.
Yes, go. I would not wish you back again.
Elizabeth considers Wickham as she takes a sip of her tea. The Bennets exit the front door of Longbourn to see Lydia off in her carriage.
Bye, Papa. Goodbye, Mama.
Oh, Lydia, my dear, we shall miss you cruelly.
Well, I shall write every day of what I'm doing and make you all wild with envy.
Oh.
I can't help it.
I shall not envy her a jot.
Well, I must go. Goodbye, Jane. Goodbye, Lizzie. I'll see if there are any eligible beaus for you. I'll send you word express. Whoop!
Lydia trips gracelessly on the carriage step.
Oh, Lord, what a laugh if I should fall and break my head.
I wish you would.
Oh, my dear girl, take every opportunity to enjoy yourself.
Mrs. Bennet smiles knowingly and waves at Lydia. Lydia nods, obviously.
Bye, goodbye.
Lydia and her family wave to each other as the carriage drives off, and Kitty begins to cry.
Well, never mind, Kitty. I dare say in a year or two you'll have got over it tolerably well. If anyone should ask for me, I shall be in my library and not to be disturbed.
A carriage carrying the gardeners arrives at Longbourn, and Jane and Elizabeth exit the house waving happily.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, you must be so tired.
The gardener children gravitate excitedly toward Jane, who calmly ushers them into the house.
Oh, you've all grown. I think you've all grown since last we said goodbye. Come into the house then.
Jane disappears inside, children following her happily. Mr. and Mrs. Gardner greet Lizzie.
Such a sweet, steady girl. Oh, Lizzie! We bear you bad tidings, not too grievous though, I hope.
The guilt is mine. My business won't allow me time away to visit all the Lake Country, so we shall have to content ourselves with Derbyshire.
Oh, but Derbyshire has many beauties, has it not?
Indeed, to me, Derbyshire is the best of all counties. You will judge for yourself whether Chatsworth is not the equal of Blenheim, and surely the southern counties have nothing to compare to the wild and untamed beauty of the peaks.
Nature and culture in harmony, you see, Lizzie. Wildness and artifice, and all in one perfect county.
Well, I was born and grew up here, so I should never disagree with that.
Where exactly?
At Lambton, a little town of no consequence to anyone, except those fortunate enough to have lived in it. I think it the dearest place in the world.
Well, then I shall not be happy till I have seen it.
Ah, it has one further claim on your interest. It is but 5 miles from Pemberley, and owes much of its prosperity to that great estate.
So near?
Not that I or any of my acquaintance enjoyed the privilege of intimacy with that family. We moved in very different circles.
Mr. Darcy fences with an instructor, while other men stand around admiring their form.
A hit, acknowledged. Very good, sir. Enough, sir?
Darcy walks away and leans on a large column, perspiration evident on his brow.
Ah, thank you, Baines.
Will you come again tomorrow, sir? At 10?
Not tomorrow. I have business in the north. I'll come back tomorrow week.
Very good, sir. I bid you good day, sir.
Thank you, Baines. Good day.
As Baines walks away, Darcy struggles to contain his frustration.
I shall conquer this. I shall.
Oh,
Elizabeth and the Gardiners sit down to eat at the inn. A maid serves them.
oh, thank you, Anna.
You're welcome, sir.
I think I should be quite happy to stay my whole life in Derbyshire.
Happy to hear it. Now, what do you say to visiting Pemberley tomorrow? It's not directly in our way, but no more than a mile or two out of it.
Do you especially wish to see it, Aunt?
I should have thought you would, having heard so much about it. And the associations are not all unpleasant. Wickham passed all his youth there, you know.
We have no business there. I should feel awkward to visit a place without a proper invitation.
No more than Blenheim or Chatsworth. There was no awkwardness there.
I shouldn't care for it myself, Lizzie, if it were merely a fine house, richly furnished. But the grounds are delightful. They have some of the finest woods in the country.
Anna, how far are we from Pemberley, my dear?
Not more than 5 miles, sir.
The grounds are very fine, are they not?
As fine as you'll see anywhere, ma'am. My oldest brother's under gardener there.
Is the family here for the summer?
No, ma'am.
Hannah smiles and exits.
Well?
Well, perhaps we might visit Pemberley after all.
Elizabeth and the Gardiners travel down the road towards Pemberley.
I think we've seen woods and groves enough to satisfy even your enthusiasm for them, Lizzie.
I confess, I had no idea Pemberley was such a great estate. Shall we reach the house itself before dark, do you think?
Oh, be patient. Wait. There.
Stop the coach.
The coach stops. Elizabeth is stunned. Mrs. Gardiner watches her with a smile.
I think one would be willing to put up with a great deal to be mistress of Pemberley.
The mistress of Pemberley will have to put up with a good deal from what I hear.
She's not likely to be anyone we know. How do you like the house, Lizzie?
Very well. I don't think I've ever seen a place so happily situated. I like it very well indeed.
Drive on. Pity then its owner should be such a proud and disagreeable man.
Yes, great pity.
Perhaps the beauty of the house renders its owner a little less repulsive, Lizzie.
Yes, perhaps. Perhaps a very little.
Well, shall we apply to the housekeeper to see inside the place?
Elizabeth nods and smiles. The carriage drives to the gate. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, proudly leads Elizabeth and the Gardiners on a tour of the house.
And that's where Mrs. Darcy used to write her letters every morning. It was her favourite room. And this is the music room.
Charming.
What a lovely room this is.
Oh, delightful.
And there's a fine prospect from that window down towards the lake.
Elizabeth walks to the window and looks out.
For all this, I might have been mistress.
This piano has just come down. It's a present from my master for Miss Georgiana.
Your master is from home, we understand.
Yes, but we expect him here tomorrow, sir.
Elizabeth is momentarily startled.
He's coming with a large party of friends and Miss Georgiana. This portrait was painted earlier this year for his 16th birthday.
Ah, she is a very handsome lady.
Oh, yes, the handsomest young lady that ever was seen. And so accomplished. She plays and sings all day long.
Mrs. Gardiner looks over a glass case in the next room.
Hey, look at this picture. It reminds me very much of someone we know.
Oh, this one, ma'am. That young gentleman was the son of the late Mr. Darcy's steward, Mr. Wickham. He's gone into the army now, but he's turned out very wild indeed, I'm afraid. And that's my master, and very like him too.
It is a handsome face, but I've never seen the original. Is it like him, Lizzie?
Oh, does this young lady know the master?
Yes, a little.
Oh, and he is a handsome gentleman, is he not, ma'am?
Yes, very handsome.
I'm sure I know none so handsome, nor so kind.
Indeed.
Aye, sir. I've never had a cross word from him in my life, and I've known him since he was 4 years old. But then, I've always observed that they that are good-natured when they are children are good-natured when they grow up.
His father was an excellent man.
He was, ma'am. And his son will be just like him, the best landlord and the best master. Ask any of his tenants or his servants. Some people call him proud, but I fancy that's only because he don't rattle away like other young men do. Now, if you will follow me, there's a finer, larger portrait of him in the gallery upstairs. This way, sir, if you please.
This fine account of Darcy is not quite consistent with his behaviour to poor Wickham.
Perhaps we might have been deceived there.
Oh, that's not likely, is it?
Outside, Mr. Darcy rides down the road to Pemberley. He slows to a stop and looks at his house through the trees before he rides to a little pond out of sight and dismounts. Darcy removes his hat and gloves. Meanwhile, inside the house, Elizabeth is led into a grand hall of portraits and looks up at the paintings of Darcy. She smiles as she admires it. The original Darcy walks closer to the lake, removing his jacket, his cravat and his vest. He walks down to the water's edge, pauses momentarily, and then dives in. A short while later, Darcy walks to the house wearing his boots and soaking wet clothes. He carries his riding stick, hat, and outer clothes, while a manservant leads his horse.
Would you like to ride him, sir?
No. Take him back to the stables.
Elizabeth walks down a slight hill and is mortified to recognise Darcy in her wake. Darcy walks several paces before realising it's her, and then stops short in equal surprise.
Mr. Darcy!
Miss Bennet,
I did not expect to see you. We understood all the family were from home, or we should never have presumed.
I returned a day early. Excuse me. Your parents are in good health?
Yes, they're very well. Thank you, sir.
Very glad to hear it. How long have you been in this part of the country?
But 2 days, sir.
Where are you staying?
At the inn at Lambton.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, I'm just arrived myself. Your parents are in good health? And all your sisters?
Yes, they are all in excellent health, sir.
Excuse me.
Darcy bows and continues towards the house. Elizabeth takes a heaving breath while the gardeners walk down to her. Elizabeth is in shock.
The man himself, I presume.
And just as handsome as in his portrait, though perhaps a little less formally attired.
We must leave here at once.
Elizabeth takes off at a quick pace as her aunt and uncle struggle to keep up.
Why, of course, if you wish.
Oh, I wish we'd never come. What must he think of me?
Was he displeased? What did he say?
Oh, nothing of consequence.
Elizabeth rushes on. Darcy opens the door and rushes down the stairs, completely redressed. He buttons up the front of his jacket as he looks around for Elizabeth and the gardeners. Darcy steps out of the courtyard to where their carriage awaits, just as Elizabeth rushes towards it.
Miss Bennet. Please allow me to apologise for not receiving you properly just now. You're not leaving?
We were, sir. I think we must.
You're not displeased with Pemberley?
No, not at all.
Then you approve of it?
Very much. But I think there are few who would not approve.
But your good opinion is rarely bestowed, and therefore more worth the earning.
Thank you.
Would you do me the honour of introducing me to your friends?
Certainly. Mr. and Mrs. Edward Gardner, Mr. Darcy. Mrs. Gardner is my aunt, Mr. Darcy. My sister Jane stayed at their house in Cheapside when she was lately in London.
Delighted to make your acquaintance, madam. Delighted, sir. You're staying in Lambton, I hear.
Yes, sir. I grew up there as a girl.
Delightful village. I remember running from Pemberley to Lambton as a boy almost every day in the horse chestnut season. There was this one very fine tree there, I remember.
On the green, by the smithy.
The very one. And Mr. Gardner, do you care for fishing?
Indeed I do, sir, when I get the chance of it.
If you have time, sir, you must come and fish in my trout stream. Well, there are carp, tench, and pike in the lake here if your bent runs to coarse fishing. I could provide you with rods and tackle, show you the best spots. Let's walk down now. Follow us to the lake. My man will show you.
Darcy walks ahead to view the lake with Mr. Gardner. The women follow arm in arm.
Is this the proud Mr. Darcy you told us of? He is all ease and friendliness, no false dignity at all.
I am as astonished as you are. I can't imagine what has affected this transformation.
Can you not?
Mrs. Gardner moves subtly ahead to take the arm of her husband as Darcy turns to Elizabeth.
Miss Bennet.
I was going...
Pray, continue.
I was going to say, again, sir, how very unexpected your arrival was. If we had known you were to be here, we should not have dreamt of invading your privacy. The housekeeper assured us you would not be here until tomorrow.
Beg you, do not make yourself uneasy. I had planned it so myself, but I found I had business with my steward, and so rode on ahead of the rest of the party without informing anyone. They will join me tomorrow, and among them are those who claim an acquaintance with you. Is Mr. Bingley and his sisters.
Oh.
There's the other person in the party who more particularly wishes to know you. Will you allow me to... Do I ask too much to introduce my sister to you during your stay at Lambton?
I should be very happy to make her acquaintance.
Thank you.
They continue walking down the lane, lined with a row of trees on either side, and reach the carriage before the lake. The Gardners wait patiently in the open carriage. Darcy hands Elizabeth up beside her aunt. Elizabeth looks at him as she sits.
Thank you.
I hope we shall meet again very soon. Good day, Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Gardner.
Darcy nods to each in turn, and then pauses, looking at Elizabeth.
Good day, Miss Bennet.
Darcy bows and steps back, and watches the carriage drive away. Elizabeth turns back to look at Darcy, who continues to look after her in the growing distance.